Welcome to Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. It is my delight and honor to welcome today's guest, Ananthanarayan. Ananthanarayan is a professor at the Center for High Energy Physics at the Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru. And Anant, among many other things, he is also an excellent researcher and works on various interesting topics related to high energy physics. That includes collider physics, low energy physics at high precision. He also has deep interest in literature and has a great sense of humor. So, welcome to Pratidwani, Anant.
Thank you very much for having me. It is a great honor and a pleasure for me to be here. And the theme, that of humanizing science, is something that appeals to me very greatly. And I commend you on this amazing initiative that you have. It is a lot of work for you, and I appreciate and admire your efforts.
Thank you, thank you. It's absolutely my pleasure. So, Anant, please tell us a little bit about your upbringing, right from the beginning. Where were you born? What was it like to grow up in a particular place where you were, and other initial biographical details.
Yes, I was born in 1964, and I will be 60 very soon. And my late mother, would often tell me that the date of my arrival was given as May 27th, and then it turned out to be the day on which our first prime minister passed away. And she was really worried that her son's birth. Of course, she didn't know that it was a son or a daughter. Would coincide with that date, and to her relief, shall we say, it was another 2 weeks before I was born. I was born in Hyderabad because my maternal grandfather had been one of the first judges of the AP High Court. He moved there after the formation of Andhra Pradesh, and he was one of the first High Court judges. And after his retirement, he continued to live in Hyderabad. My father was in All India Services and the Indian Audit and Account Service. So when my parents were married a few years earlier, he had been posted to Shillong at the time, such a scenic and beautiful place. And my mother would often talk to me about Shillong. And later, I had a colleague who was working there, and I was appointed to some of the statutory bodies of the Northeastern Hill University in Shillong, and I had the opportunity to go there and visit there. And then I know why my mother was so happy and loved that place so much. In fact, she was very young when she was married, and then she taught chemistry at the famous Lady Keane College in Shillong. But she didn't stay there very long after that. My father was transferred out, and they moved back to this part of India. So I have an older sister who's not older by very much, and we grew up fairly close. We also had a fairly large um, circle of aunts and uncles and cousins and so on in Hyderabad. Almost there's nobody left now except for a couple of cousins. And it was a very happy childhood. And my father was also posted to Ahmedabad when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I have some memories of that. But then after that, again, he got a posting to Hyderabad. And I finished my entire schooling there in Hyderabad up till class 10 in a school called St. Paul's High School, which is also the alma mater to Pullela Gopichand, Dr. Srinath Reddy, Jaipal Reddy, who was a member of parliament, and I'm sure there are many, many others. Um, and then I did my what was called intermediate first and second years at a college called Little Flower Junior College. It's a biblical name. It was also a Catholic institution, one of the best colleges in Hyderabad at that time. And so that was my early childhood, a carefree one, where we used to have lots of sports and games. Not that I was very good at any of them, but had a lot of time for free time. And then I grew up partly in the home of my aunt and uncle, which was full of books. And it was a wonderful childhood. And I want to say that there was no television in Hyderabad till I was about the ninth standard. So we grew up reading lots of books, and to amuse ourselves, we had to do things, maybe a little bit of art. My mother even got us a music teacher, and of course, I'm not good at singing. But we had all these dimensions to our childhood, completely free of cell phones, mobile phones, and so on. Maybe I should say a few words about my families also. My mother,
Yes, yes.
had an MSc in chemistry very early in 1959. She was obviously very young at that time, and she had very scientific approach, and she was very proud of her background in chemistry, even though she would keep claiming that she didn't remember any chemistry. She would always remember the names of molecules, and so things studying things like organic chemistry was not so bad because we could always ask her if we had forgotten the name of a molecule. Then, after she was married, of course, her education was discontinued. But later, she got degrees from Osmania University, first in journalism and then in education. And then she even went for a year to the US for a master's and then came back and finished a PhD again in Osmania University. She worked in what is called a B.Ed college. It was called the NSR College for Neelam Sanjeev Reddy. It belonged to a school of, a conglomerate of educational institutions belonging to something called the Vivek Vardhini Society in Hyderabad. Now, Hyderabad, one must understand, is a really multicultural place with many, many different, streams of Indian culture meeting there. So this Vivek Vardhani Society was by Marathi-speaking people, and it has a history dating back to pre-independence days also. So Hyderabad is a city with a lot of culture and a lot of history in so many ways. My father came from Tamil Nadu. His father had been a doctor in the army. He lost his mother very early, and his mother was a sister of a very famous uh, playwright in Kannada whose name was T.P. Kailasam. He is very well known even till this day. So, although he didn't have any contact with his maternal family because of the death of his mother, he was in touch with some of his cousins. My father is also no more, but they used to come very often to Bangalore, and we would go and meet some of his cousins who were also, uh, you know, had only 1 degree of separation from Kailasam. So they had a lot of affection and a lot of regard for so many of these trends in Indian life. My mother actually was more Telugu than Tamil, and she was a great lover of the Telugu language. So in our family, we actually have all these languages of Tamil and Telugu. Kannada, we don't really know because we never lived in Karnataka, but I am very fond of this association with Kailasam. I'm actually married to a person who comes originally from Bihar, so we also have Hindi in the family. So I'm very pleased that somehow the experience of living in India with all these languages and all these cultures is extremely fulfilling for us, and it has been great for our development and for our comfort, because I think language is one of the basis of connections with other human beings, and of course English is the language for us. So that is a little bit about me, about my
Oh, beautiful.
yes, thank you. Yes,
What wonderful, wonderful. This the final part, what you just mentioned, that the language becomes a framework for the culture, is so true. In fact, it also has a very deep bearing on how you look at your local universe and the global universe, so to speak, in that sense. Could you also paint us a picture of your kind of upbringing in terms of intellectual engagement at
yes,
your home? How was it to, because you did mention that your mother was deeply interested in chemistry, also went on to also study journalism and education, which is something which is a very important combination, not just for now, even for any particular time, if you go back in the decades which has preceded it. Could you just give us a picture of that? How was it to interact with your parents? What was the kind of education at home you got? We'll come to the school education in a minute, but
yes,
I would be interested to know about your interactions with your parents and how it influenced your thinking.
yes. My father had actually studied only till his BSc, even though his father had been a doctor in the army. I don't know exactly. He didn't say very much about his about the circumstances under which he actually decided to, or rather, what are the circumstances under which he could not continue for higher education. Because I'm sure he'd have liked to, but probably there's some pressure to take up a job immediately. So he joined services called SAS, And then later, I guess he took some more exams and entered the Indian Audit and Account Service. So, needless to say, considering that he was in this particular service, he was very good at arithmetic, and he had very strong English. Even though I think that in his early years, his medium of education was Tamil, his English was almost perfect. I would say I've never known him to make a single mistake. And he had an extremely rich vocabulary in English and written English. But I guess somehow because he felt he had not gone for a master's in PhD and all, and his early years were in physics, he had a collection of physics books that I think he picked up. They were relatively inexpensive books, mostly Indian editions. And I would see books on subjects like quantum mechanics and tensors and mathematical and some topics in mathematics that he had. My mother, on the other hand, comes from a family where there were many people who were engaged in intellectual pursuits. Her elder sister's son is Professor Aladi Sitaram, who's much senior to me, is my first cousin and had a fairly strong influence on my tastes and approach. And he had done his PhD in the University of Washington in Seattle. I mean, he's about 16 or 17 years my senior. So he also used to have a collection of books that I used to use when I was a kid. Just looking at his books, get interested in topics like mathematics, and I would hear him talk about people like Harish Chandra, and I would hear names like Selberg zeta function. And their uncle was Dr. Alladi Ramakrishnan, who was the founder of the Institute of Mathematical Sciences in Chennai. Now, he's not a person that I ever met, and he was much senior to my mother also. But my mother told me only a few months before her demise, which was about 4 years ago, that she used to, with other cousins, be playing in the gardens of her uncle's house, the father of Alladi Ramakrishnan. And then she would meet some of the visitors who would come. And one of the visitors who she said that she actually sort of spoke to several times was Paul Dirac. Now, Dirac, soon after our independence, he had come to India and he had spent quite a bit of time in TIFR Bombay, and he had also come to Chennai or Madras in those days. And Mr. Ramakrishnan actually started his institute in his own home. So at some point, there's no sharp distinction between what was the institute and what was his home. And she told me that it was really very nice to have talked to him. So, I'd heard the names of some of these people very early, and I knew that it was a fairly glamorous field. And, this science and physics and mathematics, especially most romantic fields. So I was kind of attracted to these and was fairly good at problem solving even as a kid. Fairly good, not spectacularly good. I know exactly where I stand. I know how much better many of the kids of my age group were, but that was one of the things. It's ultimately a matter of taste, which gets inculcated in a person when he or she is fairly young. And this is where we also have the issue of role models and the kinds of people that would inspire you to take up this or that. You also have to know the limits of your abilities, and you have to know what is feasible and what is not. And of course, you have to have the ambition and the drive and the energy and the persistence. These are all features. But I must say that I grew up at a time when we didn't worry too much about money, about, very glamorous things. We grew up in very middle class circumstances. So it was not part of my ambition to have a very large home or to have a glamorous car or any of these things. So it was a natural gravitation towards things that I found appealing and to subjects where I thought I had aptitude. Of course, nobody else told me that I had aptitude or did not. It was just a feeling that I had that perhaps that these subjects are good for me. But in 1980, just as all the other kids in our college took this or that entrance exam, I also took half a dozen entrance exams. And the only one that I was really successful at was JEE. And that ultimately was the only sort of option that I had was to go to IIT. And I chose IIT Madras because my mother said, no, I can't let you go to a faraway place like Bombay or Delhi. Although I must say, Bombay is just about the same distance as Madras is from Hyderabad. To her, the psychological distance of going to Madras was much less than going to any other place. And, she had grown up in Madras. She
So,
was familiar.
let me pause here because we will surely go to the transition phase
Yes,
into the
yes,
BTech.
sure.
Before that, I would still want to stay in the early parts of your education, especially your schooling, and these are the seeds which are
Yes,
very important,
yeah,
which lays you kind of important
yes,
seeds in terms
yes,
of interest. Could you please tell us a little bit about your schooling, where you did it, and
yes,
what is the kind of experience you had during the schooling, and
yes.
then we'll go to your college and then
Yeah,
further.
definitely. So my school is called St. Paul's High School. It is in an area called Hyderguda in Hyderabad. Even when I go back to Hyderabad, which is several times every year, I stay with my cousin, and it is less than 10-minute walk. So even on evening walks, I go past once in a way, past the school, which has grown much bigger. The buildings have grown higher and higher. And unfortunately, the school grounds have become smaller and smaller. In 2012, we had a reunion of our batch in the school, and I was present there. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I was invited to give the Brother Stanislaus Memorial Lecture, which was done online because it was more or less in the middle of the COVID years. And about a year and a half ago, I was invited to the school to go to address selected students, class 10-ish. And I was used to be a boys' school in those days. Now it is a co-ed school.
Quite.
So it was actually known for a set of very committed teachers. And one of the teachers in science, Mr. Krishnamurti, is a legendary figure. And he also spoke to us in 2012. And he said that if he goes to the US, he doesn't have to book a single hotel because in every single town, in every nook and cranny of the US, there is an alumnus of the school who would be only too happy to host him. Then we had very good teachers for mathematics, Rasul sir, as we call him. He was also the NCC coordinator. He's a very dynamic and glamorous teacher that we had at that time for mathematics. I remember now that he was very good at explaining the theorems and what we used to call riders. Now, this rider is a term that is, of course, part of Indian maths education. I don't know if it is still present in any other part of the world. Probably in Britain, it still is. Doing all these very difficult problems from Euclidean geometry of triangles and circles sitting inside triangles and pentagons and all these things. So it was a very rigorous instruction as far as mathematics was concerned. And probably even today, I benefit from that kind of visualization that we had to develop from school. Chemistry was also quite well taught, and I did not develop any disdain for chemistry. It's perfectly all right. And even now, sometimes I use examples from chemistry because again, there you can do a lot of visualization. We also had very good teachers for biology, and English instruction is also very good. If you meet students from St. Paul's from our era, you will find that most of them write and speak English very well. There's V.V. Sridhar, who's in Chennai Math Institute. He's from about my era, 1 or 2 years younger than me. Then there was Sudhakar, who used to be in SINP, a few years senior. All of them speak and write excellent English. Um, and and so all these subjects were very well taught. Hindi was the terror as far as I was concerned because it was very hard. The Andhra Pradesh Hindi syllabus was far too high for non-native speakers. Telugu was also very difficult. It is what was called the second language at that time, and very intricate. So if you're not a native Telugu speaker again, and you didn't have teachers and instructors, it was very difficult to deal with these two subjects. But apart from this, I think the instruction was very good. Teachers. That's the reason why whenever you meet kids from our school who are now not kids but who are senior citizens, they all have such amazing memories of the school, and there's such a great deal of loyalty. This alumni association is very active. Mr. Mazhar Ali Ahmed, he is the kind of uh, evangelical leader of the alumni association who does so many charitable activities, especially during the COVID period and all through the school. And that's what tells you about the school. And I should also say a few words about Little Flower Junior College, as it was called. It was in the middle of the city in those days. Now I think it's somewhere far away. We had very good teachers for mathematics and physics and chemistry. All these things, of course, have made a remarkable impression. And also, one of the English teachers who I met a few months ago. I had not seen her in over 40 years. So that's my school background. And I should also say that there were many inter-school competitions and all. So we used to meet kids from other schools in various competitions such as quizzes and debates and things of the sort. There were also a little bit of chess activity in the YMCA in Hyderabad and Narayanguda. And I'm very sad to say that when I went past, I saw that the building had been pulled down. I don't know what they're going to build there. Maybe they're going to build a mall or they're going to build one more car park.
Mhm.
So it was a more innocent era, also an era of lending libraries. Most of us would go to these couple of basically holes in the wall where there would be amazing trove of books, which was very popular, and you would have to take one and return it after 2 weeks and pay 50 paisa or and so on. So it was like that in that era. So
Wonderful, wonderful, beautiful description. In fact, I want to just touch upon a couple of points, what you also alluded to. One was that you had impressive teachers in languages, especially I can see the eloquence with which you speak English is also a kind of a reflection of the fact that you have a very good foundation in communicating English, using English for your communication, and that probably would have also played a role in your reading, right? Because that would have influenced you to read something which is generally far beyond what is assigned as part of your syllabus or curriculum. Did you do quite a bit of outside reading beyond what you were prescribed generally?
oh yes, I mean it was kind of there's a cultural aspect to that. If you grow up around lots of books, you read them. And as I mentioned, one of the crucial things was that there was no television. So the only thing that kids could do was to actually read and read books, fairly difficult books, even, some of us may have plowed through, some Dickens novels here and there. I don't know how much we would have done. But yes, this foundations in language was extremely important. And poetry also.
Mm.
And our grandmother used to make us memorize some shlokas and things of the sort, which is all necessary, I guess, for building various kinds of neural pathways and to improve your fluency in various languages. And this has had a profound impact in the way in which I conduct myself. I was the chairman of the department for 9 years and 7 months, and it required me to do all sorts of things that I would have never imagined. For instance, we had to move the department from one building to another. So all the laborers I had to engage with them, and I had to, and many of them turned out to be Telugu speaking. So they were very helpful when I would speak to them in Telugu. Similarly, when it comes to English, and our trade or our profession requires us to travel to many places, and we have to establish collaborations. We have to convey the importance of the work that we do, and and we also have to read papers. Often, papers are also written in very sophisticated scientific language, and the rate at which you read a paper and you assimilate its contents and you're able to use it and take the next step forward, they do depend on your language abilities. I'm not saying it's possible to quantify these things or to have a chart or a histogram, but still, there is no doubt that you have to be able to do these things. And in my opinion, a lot of this has to do with the interactions of child with parents and language abilities that you develop talking to one another, with adults talking to children, and the vocabulary that you inherit from your parents and people around you. um, for instance, in India, we see that when children are growing up, there are a lot of people around. There's a nurse, there's a nanny, there's a cook, and they constantly, children are hearing adults speaking, so their language abilities develop very fast. On the other hand, in other societies where children hardly meet anybody, you will see that in cartoons they teach languages speaking very slowly. things of the sort. So, in my opinion, and this is entirely from opinion of a layperson, I'm sure linguists and others have done a lot of research. The more social interaction you have, the better it is for a child's overall mental health and development and happiness. I don't know if I answered your question, but roughly that is my opinion. And having more
Yeah,
than
yeah.
one language, I think, is one of the great benefits in India that we have plasticity that it gives to our brains and ability to learn many different things.
Beautiful, beautiful. In fact, that is something which is very influential in adapting yourself to anything you want to do in your life. Is the ability to grasp the language in which, let's say, you are embedded in, or the environment in which you are embedded in, and that plays a very critical role, right? Because if you can somehow manage to understand people in their own language, that always kind of integrates you into the culture much quicker than if somebody is a little away from that particular thing. On the similar lines, I would also want to ask you about another important language. We can, if at all we can call it as a language, but in one way it is mathematics. Because mathematics also has its own syntax, its own beautiful kind of grammar, so to speak. And given the fact that you are a theoretical physicist, I'm sure that is another important language which you would have learned in reasonable detail. So, would you want to give us a little bit of an overview of your kind of tryst with mathematics during your upbringing?
I guess the most important influence in this were probably the teachers. And from an early age in India, we identify ability in mathematics as synonymous with intelligence and vice versa. Now, this is not necessarily correct because human beings have very diverse dimensions, but that is what we grew up in because, we grew up in an era when, of course, you're much younger than me, but I'm talking about myself. India was only 17 years old as a new and independent nation when I was born, not even quite 16 and some months. So we were still groping and we were still developing at that time, and we had to do the best that we could. We wanted our citizens to be as useful as possible in as short a period as possible. And therefore, essential skills for the survival of the individual and survival of society had to do with having skills, all kinds of skills. So, when I was in, let's say, I was about 16 or 17, one of the favored professions was chartered accountancy or an MBA or engineering. Of course, it wasn't a craze as it is now, but definitely it was one of the important professional avenues that would promise you a decent life. And each one of these examples that I have mentioned necessitates skill in mathematics. You simply cannot do without it, right? I mean, even if you're a chartered accountant, you need to be remarkably adept at numbers. You have to remember interest rates. You have to compute P by E ratios and so on and so forth. So, mathematics for many of us in India actually is a way of life. Even the store that I go to in the morning, where I buy bananas and milk and so on, he comes originally from Chittur. He can speak about 5 languages, but the most amazing skill he has is the amount of addition and subtraction in mathematics that he can do. He can compute, fractions in his head. So it's all part of life in that way. So mathematics is not really alien. My sister, who became a doctor, was also good at mathematics, and even now, I find that she can compute all kinds of numbers in her head, dosages and rates of absorption, and this and that, and she has numbers at her fingertip. She knows everything about dosages, about some ESR rate has to be between this number and that number, and what should be the sodium. So it's not as if mathematics is somehow separate from rest of life. And even if you look at any sphere of human life, it's actually there. Even a musician is all the time dealing with numbers. They have to deal with their scales, their harmonics. And once they are done with the actual musical practice, they have to calculate the next schedule for catching the next flight for the next concert, and then they have to figure out the next scheduling, project that they have for when to check in and when to check out, and how many musicians will travel with them. So it's all part of life. And I think in India, even people that you might consider as not very well educated actually do have a very good sense of mathematics. And I'm also finding that the presence of smartphones has actually increased people's fluency with numbers and mathematics. They can do all kinds of things because they have essentially a pocket calculator that goes wherever they go. I don't know if I went off totally on a tangent, but this is roughly
No,
the.
no, no. That's actually very, very nice. In fact, that's a very important point what you're making. In fact, there's a notion sometimes that technology doesn't facilitate you to look into the world as though it has kind of regressed. But the fact that, in fact, Steven Pinker, as you probably would be aware of, the Harvard psychologist, actually mentions that the ability to express your thoughts through language has probably been facilitated by the available technology. So sometimes the notion is that the technology is kind of pulling you back. In its own interesting way, it probably also assists you to do things in a very interesting way. And yeah, what you're saying is something which is very interesting, because the way you do computation probably has changed, but somebody who is inclined to do that would anyway do it using the tools available, right?
Yes.
Fascinating, fascinating. So we're going to now move towards one of the important transitions which will happen in your life at the cusp of you finishing your pre-university, and then you are now embarking on to your studies at Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. And interestingly, you move to take up chemical engineering as your specialization. Tell us about that particular transition, and how and why you made that decision, and how was your experience being an engineer?
I had a cousin who was many years my senior who had been to IIT Madras. That's the only thing that I knew about it. And I knew that there were something called branches in engineering, and had no real clear idea. So this person was in electronics, okay, fine. And then I was dimly aware that there were branches like mechanical engineering and civil engineering and electrical engineering, and yeah, sure, chemical engineering, one had heard of it. Um, so I was for intermediate first and second years, what we now call class 11 and 12. I was in this college, which was a part of the Andhra Pradesh Intermediate Board. So there was a boy in our class, boy, now man, Narasimha Rao. So one fine day when we were in the second year of intermediate, he came by and said, "I'm leaving." So I was shocked. I said, "How come you're leaving without finishing your intermediate?" So he said, "No, no, there is this place called IIT Madras, and I took the entrance exam, and we were eligible to appear after 11th standard, and I've been selected, and I'm taking up chemical engineering," and he was gone. So he had gone to one of the Kendriya Vidyalayas up to his class 10. And in these schools, like Kendriya Vidyalayas, there's a much more awareness of career options. There are many boys who know that they want to go to the National Defense Academy in a place called Khadakwasla in Pune. There are others who know that they want to go into the Merchant Navy, and there are yet others who know that they want to become special class railway apprentice. I had no clue about any of these things. I didn't even know what college was. For me, college meant a BSc or a BCom or Nizam College because one would walk past it. It wasn't very far from where we used to live. So there is such a thing called IIT, and it even has an entrance exam, was news to me. So then anyway, all the other kids in the class they started studying for IIT, and someone said that look, there's this correspondence course offered by Agarwal classes. Why
Yeah.
don't you take it? somebody suggested. Somebody else said there's something called brilliant tutorials. There
Mm.
was a toss up, which A for Agarwal, B for brilliant. So went for Agarwal classes, and you had to fill out an application and send it. And then after that, there used to be beautiful homework problems that arrive by post. And then you had to tear it open, and then you had to pull out a booklet, beautifully printed problems and problems, some selected solutions. And the only thing that I liked to do was I enjoyed doing problems. I was fairly good at it. So that's how it started. And then there were a couple of other boys in my class, and we decided that together we will study for these exams. So in fact, that was the year when my mother had gone to the US to University of Buffalo for her masters. So we used to divide our time between our grandmother, who was living with my aunt, and my father, who had his own apartment not so far away, hardly 15 minutes away. And it was great fun studying with these guys, working on maths problems and physics problems and chemistry problems. We would do this, and you had to go uh, for something called contact classes of Agarwal classes,
Mm.
which was for about 2 weeks in a place called Oasis School. It was the pointed infinity, and I don't even know how I went there. Must have taken a bus. I'm saying all this because this Oasis School today is in the middle of Hyderabad. In these 40 years, the city has transformed so completely that a place that was considered the pointed infinity has become the center. So you can imagine how much the city has grown. And it's surrounded by financial district and IKEA and this and that. So you see how much the world has transformed, in less than a lifetime. So anyway, so there was this JE which was in the May of 1980, and I took the exam. I did very well in chemistry, less well in physics, and even worse in mathematics. And I was so depressed at the end of maths, I thought I would skip the English, but I said, anyway, let me finish this exam. And so that's how it happened. And then my sister was going for this medical college at the time. So we had gone to Delhi. I was sent as an escort for my sister because she had to appear for the entrance exam in Delhi. And when we arrived in Delhi, my mother's friend who had come to get us told me, your father just called me to say that you have a rank in IIT. This is astonishing. So, oh, great. So now I don't have to take any more entrance exams because I'd taken one for ISI. And I think I took one or two more entrance exams and, of course, drew a blank in all of them. So good. I didn't have any further decision to take. So then you ask me why chemical engineering? Because then the boundary conditions where it had to be in Madras,
Mm.
and whatever my rank was at that time, the most favored branch was chemical engineering, which was okay because I liked chemistry and I was reasonably good at it. So that's how it happened. And then it turns out that it is very good because chemical engineering actually is a rather academic discipline. It has subjects like thermodynamics and fluid mechanics and all very interesting subjects, which I did not know at that time because of the fierce competition in IITs. Many students get put off, and it's almost cutthroat. It need not be like that because everybody is going to get an opportunity anyway. So that's how it happened. And then one of the things I want to say was this Narasimha Rao, who had gone after 11th standard, he could do that because the BTech was a 5 year course. So it was
Mm.
assumed that you could get in after 11th and had 5 years of education. And then the year after I joined from 1981, the eligibility became 12th standard or intermediate second year, and the BTech was a 4 year course. So mine was the last 5 year batch, which I think is one of the best things that ever happened to my in my life because the foundational courses in IIT Madras were so good, and that extra year is what has given me the foundations that I use to this day in terms of basic mathematics and physics and approach to problem solving. Um,
Yeah, this is something which is very important, what you're mentioning, because generally there is, at least in the current situation, a kind of a hurry to quicken up the foundational aspect of learning. And in an era where such kind of push is happening, if one tries to pause and look at what is that they are really learning during that age, it sometimes they come out a bit lacking in that foundation. And as you clearly mentioned, that those foundations will serve you all throughout your life. And I assume that is a very important thing, right? Because it plays a critical role in whatever you want to do. It need not be just the research.
You know, my BTech had 230 credits, 230 minimum. So I
Wow.
think by the time I finished, I think I had about 239, if that's the number that I remember right. I think it's very different now, and some of my friends in the engineering departments here who have a better idea than I about the course structure and so on, they say that the present era it's very light. The courses are all watered down and they are much less rigorous than what it was in our era. So this entire undergraduate phase is actually is extremely important from the point of view of knowledge and building the basics for a person's future trajectory. On the other hand, today I think people don't even really need to use their brain very much. In any industry, there are always softwares, pre-canned things. The computer is doing everything, and you, as a human being, it's not clear what you need to do. So there is some kind of feedback from technology, which has made it not necessary for people to have as rigorous an education as we probably had to. And this is not just my perception. I have friends who teach in England, for instance, or in Great Britain, who say that the quality of students and the knowledge base has really shrunk compared to what they themselves have seen 10 or 15 years ago. That many students almost know nothing. So this is really a problem. And if you look at someone like me, I finished my BTech in literally end of 1984, which is almost 40 years ago. It's a very long time, and I think so many changes have taken place in education. On the other hand, they have facilities that we never had. All the students have laptops, they all have access to softwares, they can download this and that. And a problem that probably took you and me 10 days to do with paper and pencil, they can do in 45 minutes on the computer. So this feedback cycle is much smaller, much more compressed than ever before. So it's like a world that is really in change and in transition. So how they deal with it and so on is also it's a challenge for them, and how to find their own place in the scheme of things.
Very, 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 very pertinently put. Because this aspect also sometimes, one feels a little sad because in the heat of the moment, maybe they are skipping things to really get an illusion that they are making some progress. But if you look at the intellectual satisfaction one derives out of doing things slowly and trying to grasp things, not only just through books, but also through the experiences one gains out of one's education. In my own case, for example, I did my BSc when the system was an annual system, and when I transitioned to MSc, it was the first batch during that particular era where the annual system was going away and the semester system was brought
Hmm.
in.
Yes,
And I could see that there was a bit of a rush in such kind of a situation. Whereas the BSc, the annual exams were only maybe a year away from when you are actually doing your courses,
yes,
which gave you a lot more room to go to library, read something which is very peripheral. It need
yes,
not be directly related to it. And what I learned during that particular time is serving me so well now,
yes.
because it is so non-linear, because it might not actually cater to what you're studying right there for your examination, but it forms an important foundation. And I'm very sure it would be similar in your experience too, right? Because that foundation, as you very nicely mentioned about those 5 years, what you are really spending then would really have an impact going forward.
We had many courses in engineering drawing. Now, when I went
Mm.
to IIT and moved into the hostel, I used to see students, both from my batch and seniors, who would be carrying around a stick, two sticks joined, a long stick and a small stick that was stuck to each other. I had no idea what these guys were carrying around until I bought one and I had to carry it around myself. So this was something called a T square that was needed along with a set of set squares and a protractor and all these things. And there were other more sophisticated guys who were more hip, who did not have T squares, but they had something called a mini drafter instead, which is much more fancy looking. But of course, I had no aptitude for any of these things. I'd never seen any of these things. See, there had never had been an engineer in the family, so I had never ever seen anything that looked remotely like a drawing, or never seen a plan or a blueprint or anything of this. But there were other students for who all this was like really easy. Probably the background and the tradition they came from, or they probably had parents who had taught them these things, or an elder brother who had done this or that. So, engineering drawing, for instance, is something that I hated when I was there. But 45 years later, I find, not 44, 44 years later, I find that the experience I gained from having several courses in engineering drawing, today I can look at a cross section or a cutout of some machine, say at the LHC, and I can actually understand what that cutout means. I know that there's a magnet here, and then there's a coil there, and then I know the meaning of a plan or an elevation. So you see, this basic foundational courses actually leave an imprint in a way that you cannot predict. It's not as if somebody in the year 1979 decided that, I'm going to design engineering drawing courses so that in the year 2023, Anant and Pavan can understand the cutout of an LHC. It doesn't work like that. So we develop all these methods. It's a collective knowledge, a collective experience that we put together in the project of education, in the project of knowledge, which will serve future generations, the next generation of students, the next generation of teachers. And the speed and pace at which we learn, I think, also needs to be humanized. This is the point that you were saying. Let's say, I mean, you gave very particular and specific examples, like an yearly system or a semester system. Some places they try a quarter system, at other places they try a trimester system, and so on. Everything has advantages and disadvantages, but they all need to take into account the human factor. What suits the child or the student the best? You cannot have fixed recipes for everybody and everything. Different people learn at different speeds. For instance, I consider myself to be a fairly slow learner. I, on the other hand, I probably have a little more patience than many others, that I keep returning to problems that I could not solve 2 weeks ago. I'm going to set it aside, do something else, come back to it after a week and say, so this is what really needs to be done. So I think this human dimension is very important, that different students will learn at different speeds, and there is no one size that fits all. There's no playbook. We need to have a sufficiently flexible education system which makes learning and education also a pleasure for the child. This again goes back to what I was saying, that when I was a kid, we were still a young country. We didn't have all this knowledge and experience and all this theories and so on. Although my mother, being an educationist, I used to hear of the work of people like John Dewey and Ivan Illich and people of the sort who were very influential in the West as far as education is concerned. Well, we also cite people like Swami Vivekananda, but he's a figure from a very long time ago, pre independence, long before even independence. So, what we need today is we need educators, we need those with experience who look back at all the experience of the last 40 years, the last 50 years, and come up with a new plan for the future, how to space things out, how to really help children. And there's another expression that I learned from my mother, which is that of child centric education. I'm not really sure I know what it means, but it's a very appealing phrase. That's, of course, for children, but in institutions such as yours and where I work, where we have students in the age group of 18, 19, 20, we can't call them children, but we can't call them adults either. So I think adolescents or young adults, they have their own peculiar issues, their own difficulties, their own strengths also. So we need to somehow bring them into the picture and see how best to do with all this. because both their bodies and their minds, they are undergoing very rapid changes, and they are also under tremendous pressure to succeed. They also think that the clock is ticking, although they need not be so hyper, but most of them I find are hyper. So I think that many of the issues that you mentioned of learning, the speed, the pace, all these things are very important for all institutions and all educators.
Yeah, a very very pertinent point. In fact, during this particular issue, when you mentioned about the aspect of patience and revisiting a problem which you would have not succeeded in solving and coming back to it is such an important kind of characteristic of a researcher, right? Because many a times there is a notion sometimes, especially among young researchers, that you go to a lab or you go to, let's say, an office or to your desk or to your board, and you try to solve it, kind of magic genius doing everything and getting things out. It's that particular incubation of thought, and also exposure to failure and revisiting the problem again. It's just like writing, right? Because the revision is where the real magic happens many a times, even while writing. And this is the point which sometimes is lost again in this kind of hurry to accomplish things. And do you also observe that, given that you also interact with so many students and also many young researchers and others?
Um, so the thing for students is that they are for not a very extended period of time. So let us consider PhD student, somebody who's finished an MSc and comes to IISc or ISIL. So they have 5 years for the PhD. There's a limited period within which they have to finish, get enough results, write the paper, get it published, write the thesis. It's almost an inhuman situation because of the extreme time pressure. And for the first year, they're doing courses, they're doing homework, they are submitting this, then they have to appear for comprehensive, so on. And they are just young researchers. This is the first time in their life that they are actually even looking at unsolved problems. Until that
Mm.
point, everything that they have done, there's a solution manual available all the time. So you try for a day, you try for 2 days, you don't get it. You can Google and download the solution manual and then you can look it up. But research is not like that. What many of them don't understand probably is that research is an activity where even the supervisor doesn't know the answer, right? I mean,
Mm.
that's exactly what is.
Precisely.
So sometimes, you hear a lot of acrimony between students and supervisors not finishing the problem. Maybe the supervisor doesn't know how to finish the problem. He or she also has to work on it. For students, of course, one of the most important things, and this is something that uh, it's very hard to explain to them, is that this you have to spend enough time. If you're working with experiments, you have to put in a certain number of hours, no matter what, and you have to try many different things. You can't be passive. You have to get your hands dirty. Same thing if you're going to be a theorist, you have to put the pencil to paper, or you have to, open your mathematical notebook and you have to try things out. And you have to keep trying. That perseverance is a very important aspect of research. And it is not something that can be taught, it's something that they have to learn on their own also. So, how to mentor a student and take them through this is not easy. So I don't know if that's the kind of question you were asking, or is it?
Yeah,
Am I
yeah,
answering it
yeah,
right?
yeah. In fact, on similar lines, exactly. In fact, that's the whole point about this. The process of research needs perseverance. In fact, that is an important point, and not to really, give up on pursuits which you yourself would have thought to be very interesting. In fact, that is something. Not I'm not only telling about just the students. In fact, for a lot of people, one starts with a lot of motivation and interest, but it also requires kind of some kind of a self discipline to pursue the problem for a reasonably long period of time, where the things can go a little rough, and then probably due to that particular perseverance you might find some kind of headway towards some interesting point within the problem what you're studying. Maybe you may redefine the question. It might lead to some new aspect into your own research, and that probably can facilitate new findings, and hopefully also can lead to some interesting pathways in the research. So I assume you would have also seen that in your own research, right? That's something which is
Yes, of course. The problem with the way in which research is portrayed in society and in the popular mind is your role models, or those who are propped up by media, are very glamorous personalities.
Mm,
It's somebody of the level of Einstein or Richard Feynman. These are all very exceptional persons. Most researchers are not like that. They are just normal people, with many different abilities, who do research for a variety of reasons. That it's an attractive profession, and the problems that they're working on are very interesting and important. There's also the issue of society needing such persons, that the work is somehow directly involved with the health of society, as is often the case with, say, biology research, or even chemistry research, or developing new materials. So there are many dimensions to the research activity and research profession. A given country, or at a given epoch in history, there are very specific circumstances under which educational institutions or research institutions come into being. How do they develop an inner life? A whole country may develop an inner life of its scientific life and the direction that it finds itself. The professionalization of this enterprise, from being just an activity of half a dozen very committed amateurs, to really professional uh, activity at a scale that was not even conceived of before it happened. There are so many forces at work, and there are often international forces or historical forces such as wars, or
mm,
economic systems changing, which lead to events and changes for which no individual is responsible. I mean, the Soviet Union had a flowering of science because after the revolution in 1917, their leaders decided that we really need to showcase science. So they also needed it because they needed it to build up the country. Then the war came, and then you needed people to participate in the war effort, as it was in the United States. The US, of course, was not the number one country before the Second World War. The focus, or the center, was in Europe and Germany, in the
mm.
UK and Germany and other places and other colonial powers. But it shifted very rapidly, and the US became number one, partly because of the war. And the
War,
way in
yeah.
which these professions change are due to forces that no individual actually controls. And other things like the U.S. Uh, for instance, opening its and relaxing its immigration policies made it possible for people from all over the world to go there. After the war, the Jewish people went there. Then in the 60s, people from India started going there, and now they have populated every department and every nook and cranny in the US. So there are so many things which are outside the control of individuals, and this is the historical flow. So it's also, of course, overwhelming for a person, individual, to decide what he or she wants to do. Somebody may choose a research career just because it's comfortable. Someone else may choose it because they really love it. I'm not saying one is wrong or right, but there are forces that we don't control. X may think that he or she doesn't have any aptitude for anything else in life. So they think that I want to hide in a university, away from a corporate environment where I would never be able to survive, and so many things of this sort. These are the forces that influence how a person makes these decisions, makes or
Mhm.
is driven to certain decisions and certain choices. I don't know if I've even answered remotely what your question was, but
Yeah, yeah. No, no. In fact, it's actually very pertinent. In fact, what you mentioned is very interesting, and also the segues into something which is also an important phase in your life, where you now get into the mainstream of your your research in terms of your PhD. Tell us about the transition. How and why did it happen? For example, how did you really get into physics? And second important question is, how did you really get interested and motivated to go into high energy physics?
Yes.
Because the although you might be interested in it, but a transition from chemical engineering to that would not be trivial. So that is something which I'm very curious to learn about.
Towards the middle of my third year or so of my 5 year BTech, I realized that I wasn't doing very well at all in any of the engineering subjects. Everybody else was far better than me. I don't know that I was probably very immature and I probably should have worked harder. It was the first time in my life that I was away from home. I was in a hostel. I loved and enjoyed every minute of the freedom, the open air theatre in IIT Madras. I had a bicycle and I had the possibility of going out into the city. So probably I was not devoting enough time to my studies, and this obviously affected my grades and all that. And I found that I really was not enjoying most of the engineering subjects. And I think that it's just a product of my immaturity, nothing else. And in the meantime, I had done uh, quite well in the physics courses and the maths courses. And so I thought, hey, why didn't I try this? So I started studying more maths and physics on my own. And I started taking, IIT had a very wonderful course structure. We had this all this modern ideas of core courses and electives, and you could take courses from other departments. And that flexibility was fantastic. I registered for at least three courses from the MSc physics courses, and I did very well on them. So I said, "Gee, I really must be talented in this subject." So that is what helped me, kind of head in that direction. And I had also talked to one or two maths teachers who were very helpful. One, Dr. Subramaniam, I think was his name. And of course, I took courses with the legendary IIT physics teachers such as Balakrishnan and Rangarajan and Swaminathan, who was a very famous figure of that era. Unfortunately, he died very young, within a few months of his retirement. Uh,
Was Art Srinivasan also there? Art
yes,
Srinivasan
he was
was,
also
yeah.
there. And in
Okay,
fact,
okay.
I had an association with him much later in the Kumari LA Meera Memorial Foundation.
Hmm.
He used to be a trustee. And when he stepped down as a trustee because of his other commitments, I was his replacement on the board.
Oh, wonderful,
So those were
wonderful.
very large shoes for me to fill. So I
Hmm.
had worked very actively with the trust for several years, conducting many public lectures and
Hmm.
other activities of the trust here in Bangalore, because a lot of the activities were over here. So anyway, as it happened, one day I was just towards my last semester, maths teacher was going by on a scooter, and he said, there's another institute here. It's called the Institute of Mathematical Sciences. I said, yes, but that was founded by my uncle. He said, yeah, but it's just down the street. And I had no idea that it was down the street. Said that they are looking for students because they have a new director, George Sudarshan, was taken over as a director, and they are looking for students. So I took the entrance exam and I was selected. So this again reinforced my belief that I had aptitude for this subject. So anyway, so I was selected and I joined there, but I rapidly realized that I didn't have the background to cope in an advanced PhD program because I didn't have enough courses in mathematics. In the meantime, I had applied to American universities and I got an offer from University of Delaware.
Hmm.
The main reason for selecting the universities that I did for applying are those universities that did not have an application fee. So obviously,
Yes, yes.
so it was a random choice, and I got this offer early, and soon I decided that I probably should go for a more systematic program. And amazingly,
Delaware also has a very strong chemical
that
engineering
it does,
department, right?
yes. So in fact,
Yeah,
that's the reason why the university was even known in IIT, because of its
yeah. Yes.
engineering department. It's all series of accidents. Sometimes when I think
Right.
about it, I really wonder how I stumbled from one thing into another. My entire life seems to have been a Brownian process. So that's how it happened. Anyway,
Beautiful.
when I got to Delaware, it was fine. I actually liked many of the courses, and I did pretty well on
So
most.
this was in physics, in the physics
This was in
department.
physics, yes, yes. Then I had to also write a. I knew at the time that one should get a master's because I know that when you apply for jobs in India, that they are going to ask for an
mm,
MSc. So I
mm,
had developed a kind of survival strategy. So I got both the masters and the physics and PhD in physics. My advisor was a person who had given a talk, and I said, "Hey, he doesn't quite look American." And it turned out that he was originally from Pakistan. His mother was,
wow.
and even studied in Allahabad, and then they had emigrated to the UK and then eventually gone to the US. So that's my thesis advisor, Kaiser Shafi. I have a wonderful relationship with him. Even now, we talk about once or twice a year, and we've been very good friends. And the last couple of visits, my last visit to the US was over 10 years ago. I met him then. And in 2003, I spent several months in the US. At that time, also, we
Mhm.
spent. So anyway, the reason I got attracted to particle physics was my stay in Institute of Mathematical Sciences. There was nothing else at that time in that everybody was a particle physicist. And George, of course, is famous. And Professor Rajasekaran, he was also a great
Yeah.
enthusiast for particle physics. So my mind was kind of completely quenched in that short period that I was there,
Mm.
that I shall do this and nothing else in my life. I don't know if that is right or wrong, but that's really how it happened. And when I went to Delaware, Kaiser Shafi happened to be in the same field, and I said, "Gosh, this must be, divinely ordained." So that's how it happened. And I've been in the same field virtually ever since. For somebody who moved from chemical engineering to physics, within physics, I haven't moved much. Only subfields, different aspects of particle physics. In those days, there was a lot of attraction to do cosmology also because,
Mm, mm,
inflation theory had just arrived and string theory was just born. But I felt that areas like string theory are too sophisticated, and cosmology is a subject for which you need, some kind of an instinct and a sixth sense, which I don't have. So particle physics is much more strongly and well defined, and I have been working in that field ever since, using various methods of mathematics, mathematical physics. Now I use a lot of computers. So that's how my, uh, you know, uh, that's how my long relationship with this subject has developed.
beautiful, beautiful. It's also very fascinating because, in a way, there is a very strong element of, you know, very kind of realistic thinking when you go into early parts of nuclear physics and its transition to particle physics. Because if you also look at the history, circa roughly around the 1950s to 1970s, the way nuclear physics turned or kind of morphed into particle physics
Yes,
thanks to accelerators and other things,
yes,
that element of looking at the world both from an abstract viewpoint and from a very strong engineering viewpoint, because all these colloiders and other things what we speak about, all the beautiful physics experiments, it has probably one of the most sophisticated engineering thinking behind them. And that probably also is one reason why the high energy physics community has reasonably a kind of a high appreciation of engineering sciences. Do you think so? I'm just kind of trying to figure that out and think loud. Your input would be very interesting on that particular thing.
what you're saying is absolutely correct.
Mhm.
The thing is, a field like nuclear physics was again born partly because of the forces of the Second World War
Mhm.
and nuclear energy, and of course the military applications of that. So it became a field that became very strongly funded by countries such as US and all the victors of the Second World War, and also the race had started between
Mhm.
the Soviet Union and the US, and we saw also the other frontier, which is the space frontier, where of course the Soviet Union kind of rushed ahead for a while, and of course the US and all caught up soon afterwards. So it was the in those kind of forces and those tumultuous events and momentous events of the Second World War that many of these subjects were born. Particle physics itself, you may say, uh, most of the minds and the big figures in the field of elementary particle physics are people who are associated with the Manhattan Project and they were the new intellectual giants. And often Oppenheimer is described as the American Prometheus, the man who stole the fire from the
Mhm.
heavens, and all this sort of thing. There's also, of course, a huge glamour that arose because of that, and and there were many laboratories and so on founded as a result of these things, whether it is Stanford or in the East Coast. You may have had Cornell University, or you may have Fermilab, and you may have Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and so many other national laboratories in the US, which came out because of this, because they really needed to be on top of this field. Simultaneously, in the Soviet Union, you must have had so many things. You must have had Dubna, you must have Novosibirsk, and also the flowering of theoretical science, because large numbers of people were trained in physics and mathematics, and these became the glamorous people. And they also were obviously very good, and they got positions in top universities in the US. And of course, in India, we were a new country at this time, and people like Homi Bhabha were obviously inspired. He was a student of Dirac, as you know, and he was
Mhm.
also part of the nuclear energy. He was also part of this whole setup. So Tata Institute, which was one of the first major modern institutes in the country, Saha Institute in Calcutta, many other smaller institutes, they also said, we as Indians, we are now a new country, we are second to none, and we will prove
Mhm.
that we are as good as anybody anywhere. And we are also going to do theoretical science at the frontier. Wherever white man is, we will also be there, and we are just as good as them,
Mhm.
and which is correct. So that is how these subjects came into being. And we have trained large numbers of people, and we have done as well as anybody else in this particular field. We have also do higher mathematics in the country.
Mhm.
Every country decides what it needs. I really feel that there's a consciousness that arises because of these historical processes. And this is how science has been born in our country and in other parts of the world. I don't know. Am I losing focus on what?
No, no, no. In fact,
Yes,
this whole podcast is not about focus. It's about
yes,
the divergence of thought. So
yes,
everything actually is knowledge here. Beautiful.
yes.
Please continue. Please continue.
Yeah. So, we have reached a stage where from nuclear physics, and, there's also the philosophical notion that we can have reductionism, which is to break down matter and knowledge to the smallest, most fundamental building blocks. And particle physics is the field that claims ownership of this particular aspect of reductionism, that we are the guys at the frontier. And that's what makes it so glamorous. Now, everybody needs something. If you are a person who's working, say, in an applied field, then you can say, hey, my work is going to have an application, let us say, in laser technology, or it's going to have an application to telemetry, or it may have an application to cancer research or to virology. But for particle physics, we do not have anything except to say that we are at the frontier, and we are doing the most important thing. And of course, we say that along the way, in order to answer the most basic questions, we are developing the best, most sophisticated theoretical tools. We are also going to use the best technology. We are going to build the LHC. We are going to, build monopole detectors. We are going to look for neutrinos, and we are going to probe all the nature, all the secrets of nature. We are going to be there. We are the guys. So that's the reason why this particular field has this kind of appeal, and it has protagonists such as Feynman and so on, who have become popular stars. Of course, he's also been gone for 35 years. We probably need the next Richard Feynman, who will speak for knowledge, who will speak for curiosity, for just the joy of doing science and physics and so on and so forth.
Very nice. Very beautifully put. So now we're going to actually kind of get an overview of the kind of research you did during your PhD days,
Yes.
and then we'll move forward
Yeah.
and to learn more about
Yeah.
other things.
My PhD days, I was working with Kaiser Shafi, as I said. We also had a close collaborator, George Lazaridis. We have did our work together at that time. So in those days, it was just this, the string theory had just, again arrived in the scene. This so-called Green-Schwarz mechanism had been discovered. and Witten and company, they wrote many papers saying that, look, this is the only only thing to do now. So people like Kaiser, who were model builders, who were more associated with signatures of, say, unified theories and so on, they said, oh, how do we now test uh, predictions of standard model? Can it give rise to models which are testable in a laboratory, in the sense, can it predict proton decay? Can it produce the number densities of monopoles? What does it say about the existence of cosmic strings? What kind of grand unified theories do they predict? If they predict this or that, then how is it going to manifest itself in terrestrial energies or day-to-day energies? So that's the kind of problems that we were looking at. So my first publication was looking at some of the properties of one of the unification groups that shows up, which is called E8. It was a very simple calculation, and it was published in International Journal of Modern Physics. Just a average paper, probably has 2 citations so far. And then we had did one or two of these superstring models, which are very interesting. It
Mhm.
had many features to it, again, not particularly striking. But the important experimental situation at the time, 1990 or so, there's a particle called the top quark, whose
Mhm.
existence had been predicted that without the top quark, a lot of the standard model physics wouldn't make any sense. And then they had a bound, experimental bound, that it had to be heavier than about 90 GeV, where a GeV as a mass unit is the mass of a proton. So it has to be at least 90 times as heavy as a proton. But no idea. Was it 92? What is it? 98? Was it 135? Nothing. So
Mhm.
I was looking at a particular model. Kaiser, with another student, had written a model in unified theories where they had some prediction for the top quark mass. So I looked at what is called the supersymmetric generalization of that model to ask whether it has a concrete prediction or not. Now, in that model, there were two parameters. One was the mass of the top quark, and another quantity called beta, tangent of an angle called beta. So, again, from my BTech days, I knew how to write some Fortran codes. So, there are some renormalization group equations, which are coupled first order differential equations with boundary conditions. And I wrote a simple Runge-Kutta integration routine. I wrote the whole thing in Fortran, from scratch, all the knowledge that I gained from my BTech classes, and I fed it to a computer. Luckily, I had a terminal in my office, and I
Mhm.
asked this computer to search for solutions in this tangent beta and top quark ranges. So it had a do loop, and then it would keep coming out, solution not found, solution not found, solution not. Then I went away somewhere, and after a couple of hours, and I came back, it was printing solutions on the screen. And then it was very beautiful. I had to constrain the space of solutions using some other inputs. And it was a fantastic thing. It gave a rather heavy quark, around 150 GeV, not 90. Remember that the bound was 90 and I was giving a number like 150. So I analyzed this a bit more. Kaiser was away. When I met him, I said, look, this model is giving this number. He said, really? I've never seen anything like this. He said, anyway, I'm going to a conference in Boston. Let me take these numbers with me. Then he came back a week later and he said, I met Richard Arnowit, who's an expert on the subject, and he said, I've never seen numbers like this. You should try and publish it. So Kaiser said, let's write a paper and we will submit it to Physical Review as a brief report. Now, anybody else, so he's a very modest person, unassuming. Anybody else would have written a Physical Review letter. He said, let's write it as a brief report whose mandate was is something that most people already know but not has been pointed out. And that was published. It got a very nice review report, and is one of our most highly cited papers. Not just mine, also Kaiser and George's most highly cited paper. So this was a real windfall for me that one of my PhD papers did very well. But at the same time, the SSC was cancelled in the US, and most people
Mhm.
who were looking for jobs at the time found nothing. And neither did I. So for a few weeks, I found a job working for a lab that had some relationship with IBM in upstate New York. Then I said, "This is awful." I mean, was my exposure to the life in a company, and I couldn't deal with it. I wanted to be back in a research institute, or with people of my own age or whatever. So I had applied to a couple of places in India, and then I got a postdoc from PRL in Ahmedabad, which I accepted. And
Mm,
later,
yeah, yeah.
I was to get something from TIFR and from IMSC in Chennai, but I decided I want to go where I have never been before. I want a complete change. So I went to PRL in Ahmedabad, which was my first postdoc.
Mm, wonderful, wonderful. See, this aspect of you know looking at research as a way to understand the world, and second aspect is also a way to understand yourself. In fact, the first one is slightly more universal, the second one is slightly more individual, but somehow it kind of merges into one at some point of time in one's research pursuit. And here you beautifully mentioned about your experience of having done this particular work, and your advisor mentioning that being modest and sending it to a place where he thought it actually is going to at least get some particular recognition from the field, but he did not really look at it as something very big, and yet it turned out to be something significant. And this is an important lesson for all of us, right? Because sometimes in the process we also forget that the process itself has its benefits. You also are doing something which is for a longer term, but during this process you also learn new things, and it makes you what you are, even going forward. And this what you just described about the fact that you can still extract a lot of joy, and yet you would be able to do something significant without having to always look at what the world thinks about it. Would you want to just give us an overview? It's slightly more philosophical in nature, but given the fact that you also meditate on these things, and in fact I know that you also have very very interesting thoughts on many things. I would really love to understand your thought process on that.
You see, the question that you asked, it has to be seen against a particular historical background also. I think we grew up in a more innocent era where, we were allowed to be what we were, and there wasn't too much peer pressure to be the smartest, biggest, most attractive,
Mm.
most fantastic, most wonderful, which is an unfortunate blight of the present era. So the era of Instagram and Snapchat, where everybody has to be beautiful, handsome, really the most sought after, the most wearing the most expensive clothes and driving the best car. It wasn't like that. So even if you had modest goals and you did something, you could just get by. And we didn't have too much fear. Oh, will I get a job? Will I not get a job?
Mm.
Maybe it's a survival instinct. Maybe we need that optimism. Maybe we need that suspension of disbelief in order to go from one day to the next. I mean, at that time, I never knew that, doing a PhD at a place like University of Delaware, which is not, shall we say, one of the most sought after universities compared to, say, Princeton or Harvard or this or that. It didn't even occur to me that it could be somehow not in my advantage, to my advantage to be a PhD from a uh, not so celebrated institution. And then I went to do a postdoc in Ahmedabad, which in PRL, which is of course very famous for space science, but it's not famous for particle physics. Although the seniors that I had were as good as people anywhere, people that who I have worked with over there and I have a lot of joint publications with, is as good as a person from any other place. I didn't know that the real world actually, real world within quotes, as in employers and others, actually judge you based on all these affiliations and your postal address and your trademark and your QR code and so on and so forth. Maybe it is a good thing that I didn't know because I just, you know, just maybe it was innocent, maybe it was foolish. I don't know what it is. So that's the nature of the world. But you must have some kernel of innocence, some kernel of
Mm.
curiosity, some kernel of good faith both about yourself and about the world, and say, look, this is how it's going to be, and I'm not going to turn into a complete operator and an opportunist. I'm going to do the best that I can. And I try to apply it to this day, that even at my advanced stage, I'm trying to learn something new every day, trying new methods. My students, for instance, we have authored many computer codes, which is very rare in India for problems of particle
Hmm.
physics. We have developed codes and made them publicly available, and we are publishing in computer physics communications, which I don't think there's any real publication from India in that particular journal, which is a niche journal for codes and important developments of this kind. It may not be at the level of solving a problem in number theory, but it's definitely important in the sense that we are going to give tools to the community that they could use for their own research. So we are serving the community in this way. So again, I'm not very sure if I've addressed the question that you asked, but that's my kind of take on
No,
this.
no, no. In fact, yeah, it's actually on the lines which I was also trying to understand, because the process of doing the research is kind of complex. And as you correctly alluded to at the beginning of the conversation too, that you really don't know where you're heading towards, because even people who are defining the question would not have the grasp of what path it will lead to. And therefore it is important for one to look at this as a slightly more open-ended and in a way also kind of improvisation part of intellectual pursuit, because you'll have to then also change your question accordingly and try to understand what you're looking at. And what you just mentioned also about the sociology of way researchers actually look at their research is also important, because you could have easily gone to a place and a group where things would have been very different from what you would have got exposed to, right? Because many a times the sociology is not uniform across various different research groups, even though they may be working on similar kind of areas.
Yes.
And I think high energy physics, given the fact that there's such a large number of people working in this area, this variety would surely come up when you are looking at the whole ecosystem, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So now we're going to move forward and discuss a little bit more about the question of why you made a transition back to India, given that you were educated in the US, and in all probability you could have probably taken an initiative and pushed a little bit more to uh, get a position there. What motivated you to come back to India? What was the thought process during that time?
As I said, around the time I finished my PhD, that was the time when the SSC was cancelled, and there were
Yeah.
hardly any positions. So the question was either you stay in physics and go wherever
Mm.
you're able to go, or you stick around in the US as most of the other people of my era did, and move to something else, move to finance, move to school teaching, or move to God knows what. So, since I felt that the only aptitude I had was to continue to do physics, even though I knew that most of the people around me were much better, I felt that this is what I really need to do. And for me, coming back to India was not a problem at all. I mean, my pay in appointment letter to PRL, I think it said 3,250 rupees or 3,500 rupees, and then it said at the end of 1 year, if I successfully manage to get an extension, I would be given another 500 rupees. It's fine. So at that time, I didn't think money was important. Today,
Mm.
my opinion is different. That you know, see, it also has to do with your circumstances. My parents had both worked, and they were not financially dependent on me. They already had a home, and so I thought, sooner or later, I will also get some job. What the heck? So for me, coming back to India was no problem. In fact, having a loving family was also an attraction. So it was no problem at all. But after 1.5 years in PRL, I went to Switzerland for 3 years as a postdoc at the University of Lausanne and University of Bern. But I knew that it was also a matter of timing. That to get a good job in India, you really have to be a little over 30 and a little less than 35. So there's hardly window of 2 or 3 years within which you have to find a good job. And I knew that it was a lottery. So after I finished in Lausanne, I had an
Mm,
offer from University of Bern, which is actually it was an accident because I knew a professor there who one fine day suddenly said that, look, I have a position. If you're done and you don't have anything else in hand, I could give it to you. So that's how I got my next postdoc in Switzerland. And in the period between the two, I came back to India and interviewed in many places and so on, and back to Switzerland. And that's the only time in
mm,
my life I felt wanted. I had multiple offers, and it's the only time that was the peak of my career, shall I say? And it's been kind of, I don't want to say anything
mm,
more
mm.
after that. Then I had these choices, and I chose IISc because I thought it was really ideally suited for me. I also felt that Bangalore is one of the better cities to be in. There are a variety of factors. As I mentioned, my wife comes from a Hindi speaking background. So, a place like Chennai, I thought is more Tamil centric, while Bangalore is more cosmopolitan. These are all untestable hypothesis, but these are the factors that I had. And I must also say the climate of Bangalore is really one of the things. And ISC, of course, had a big name, and the post at which I was appointed was higher here than any of the other positions I had, except for IIT Kanpur. But I knew Kanpur meant a lot of teaching. Here it was much more of a research position, and that's how I came to be here in 1996. So it's been 27 years that I've been here. Very normal career, very routine progression from assistant to associate to full professor to HAG, and soon to be a senior citizen. So that's how it is. I have taught quite a bit since I've been here virtually, a little more than once in 2 semesters because I've taught a little more than that. That's the normal load over here. In my early years, I didn't have many PhD students, but starting around 2007 or so, I've had steady PhD students. My 10th PhD student will defend tomorrow, and then there are two more in the pipeline after that, and the pipeline shall go dry by time the middle of this year, which is fine. I shall enter a new phase when I will start to do probably more work on my own and things that are of
Right.
interest to me. Um,
Wonderful, wonderful. Congratulations on that, because yeah, it is probably one of the most challenging, and yet probably also the most satisfying part of an academic career in research and teaching, is to also to supervise people,
yeah.
supervise, and also it need not be just only the supervision. It is the kind of jugal bandi, right?
Yes,
Because
it is.
that that is a beautiful kind of amalgamation of thoughts, creating something which is totally interesting
Many
and
of
new.
these projects I could not have done without students. The students
Absolutely.
are a big reservoir of energy, but they, of course, don't have know the subject and don't have the expertise. So it really is like that you have to discuss, and then you have to introduce them to research and make them fledge. And all of them, I must say, have fledged, and I'm sure that they will all be successful. So it's good. It's also part of our duties to produce the next
Absolutely.
generation of students. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
satisfying.
In fact, it's a very satisfying. In fact, that's a key element. It gets repeated on and always. That satisfaction of externalizing your the process of research by also bringing in another brain involved in the thought process is very satisfying. So now we'll move to the part of your career where you are now kind of transitioning into a full-fledged faculty at IASC. Your exposure to the Indian research ecosystem, and you're also you also have now enough sampling of research kind of culture from various different parts of India and also various different parts of the world. Especially in Switzerland, you spent some time, and also kind of interacted and written papers. And of course US has been always a foundational aspect of your education. So how is it for you to make a transition as an independent researcher? What was it like to actually move to Bangalore, especially in that particular era when you are now moving to Bangalore in around 2000, early 2000s, right? 2002, if I'm correct.
1996. 1996.
1996, 1996, sorry sir, not 1996, yeah, 1996. And that's a phase where India has just opened up its market. And of course the effect of that opening is still probably not felt completely. Could you tell us a little bit about that era, paint us a picture of how things were then?
See,
Yeah.
since I had been a postdoc in PRL already for a year and a half,
Mm,
I
mm,
already had a good idea. I knew, see, the community is quite small. We have, some cities, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, where we have institutions, maybe one in Bhubaneswar, and Ahmedabad, where I was a postdoc. So I knew practically everybody in the community already as a postdoc because I had traveled quite a bit. So I had no problems of adjustment and acclimatization and all this, absolutely none. And since I was a theorist, I had hardly any needs. So I joined what was then called Center for Theoretical Studies, which was a small department with just 7 members, including me. But it turned out that I was the first person in that center to actually write grants because until then everybody was a theorist and they didn't really need anything. The institute would give a couple of computers to the department. That's all. So I also probably because I had engineering background and I had guys from my BTech classes who were here on the faculty, and I learned from them. Oh, it's possible to write grants, projects, this kind of thing. So quite early, I was quite active in many different ways. So I would just keep working. And during my postdoc days in Lausanne, I got in contact with Professor P.N. Pandita. I had met him at a conference
mm,
earlier in India, who had been a professor at Nehu in Shillong, originally Kashmiri, but
mm,
he was living there. So we had already started collaborating. We had published 2 or 3 joint papers. So I came with already collaborations in my pocket. The person who was my postdoc mentor in PRL Ahmedabad, we continued our collaboration. Then by the time I came here, email was also already quite good, and the internet and so on. I just started World Wide Web. So I kept in touch with the people I had worked with in Switzerland, and then we wrote a major paper. It took many years to write after that. So I just survived on collaborations. I didn't have many students in the beginning, as I told you. Maybe I had an odd
mm.
student who also even wrote a couple of papers. Shivraj, that was his name, but he didn't stay. He went off after the masters. It was a lot of work, I must say. I kept working in
Mm.
topics that I learned in Switzerland. I learned new topics and kept working, writing small papers, big papers, medium papers. So that's what it is. Many people say, oh, you shouldn't count papers, you shouldn't look at papers. But papers and publications are milestones. That here's a job that's done. I'm not saying that writing 25 papers a year is necessary, but it's a way in which you finish your work and move on to the next thing. So that's how it started. And I think my best years in research have been the last few years. And I've had really outstanding students, and we have been able to tackle the kind of problems that I could not have done without this kind of highly enthusiastic students. Many results along the way, even in the era between 2002 and 2010, very standard publications in the field. Many of them are.
Fascinating. Yeah, now that we have discussed your transition to India and your you setting up your group, having interacted with many students, tell us a little bit about your current research and what is the kind of problems what you and your research members are working on. Just give us a flavor of that particularly.
Yes. So the last 4 or 5 years, I have been working basically on one topic, which has to do with the properties of Feynman integrals. Now, Feynman integrals are, as the name suggests, integrals that arise in elementary particle physics associated with Feynman diagrams. So, so if you draw a picture, it'll have some external lines, and then you will have some loops, and then these loops and the external lines will be associated with various particles of different masses, sometimes equal masses, sometimes unequal masses. And each one of the closed loops that you have will imply a certain integration, as in mathematics that we do integration. But this is a complicated integration
Mhm.
for dimensional space time. Actually, you do an integration over momentum variables. Since we live in four dimensions, it'll be d to the power of 4k, where k is the absolute value of the momentum. But actually, if you do it in 4 itself, then this integral is often divergent. So we change the 4 to something called 4 minus epsilon, where epsilon is some small number. And then you study it, keeping this, pretending that it is all very nice and mathematically well defined. And finally, at the end, you let the epsilon go to zero, and then you pull out pieces which are divergent in various powers of this epsilon parameter. So this is a well-defined procedure that's called dimensional regularization, which was given in about the year 1970 or so. So over 50 years, this procedure is known. But as the
Hmm.
number of loops increases and the number of different masses increases, this becomes a very complicated function of the external momenta, the masses, and the number of loops. And most of the time, you ultimately have to go to the computer and numerically evaluate these integrals by doing a Monte Carlo evaluation and sampling and so on and so forth. But still, we would like to have a very good idea, handle on how these integrals behave as a function of these external momenta of the masses, and have a theoretical and analytical understanding of the evaluations of these integrals. And they are closely related to what mathematicians call hypergeometric functions, which
Hmm.
show
Hmm.
up in mathematical physics literature. The first hypergeometric function was probably already known to Euler, but definitely known to Gauss, and large numbers of investigations were carried out depending on how many independent variables there are in the hypergeometric function. So it turns out that these integrals and hypergeometric functions are intimately related to each other. And if you view these as functions of complex variables, then it becomes even more complex, because such functions of complex variables can also become multiple valued, and then you need a prescription to correctly evaluate them and say what is what. So we have been working in this particular field of trying to evaluate such integrals. So sometimes they become very complicated, and it can be a nine-fold integral where you have integral with respect to k1, k2, k3, k4, nine of them. So how to solve these problems in general? So we have, and sometimes when you have different masses, one of the masses may be very small, other may be very big. So are there ways in which you can get expressions that in various limits you can evaluate and relate them to known functions? So with my various students, these are the things that I have been looking at in the recent past, and other techniques of trying to evaluate the parameters of the standard model, such as masses of quarks, so called mixing angles, as precisely as possible using renormalization group analysis. So these are the topics that I've been working on recently. And one of the things that we broke ground with was to be able to publish Mathematica based codes that we have
Hmm.
put in the public domain and can be used by any researcher in this field.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is actually something which is very, very interesting because uh, what there is element of computation mixed with high energy physics, which is nowadays an important pathway to really explore problems, right? In fact, that is something which is very, very kind of a strong component of your research. You use a very intensive computational resource, or is it something nominal which you use for your work?
We use mainly Mathematica. I have one of my
Hmm.
students is using, he's working with others where he needs fairly heavy computational resource. He has
Hmm.
to have work on computers with several cores, and he parallelizes his algorithms, things of the sort, and he's working on pretty complicated things. So actually, this field now is very heavily dependent on computers, and
Hmm. Hmm.
obviously, such Feynman integral evaluations are necessary for comparison of theory and experiment at even places like the Large Hadron Collider. The data that they get from there, and they say that they have measured this or that. How do you
Hmm.
know what you have measured is agreeing with the standard model or not? So your standard model theory has to be just as good in order for you to be able to deal with very accurate experimental information. So even if I don't know how to do it, many of the experts in the world in Germany and other places, they are fully on top of the experimental information, and they're on top of all these methods of theory that is being used to. One of the things that I worked on, where my work has some implications and some impact, is an evaluation of some of the uncertainties to the muon anomalous magnetic moment, about which you must have heard. This is called G minus 2 of the muon, which is measured to high
Mm.
precision Fermi
High
Lab
precision.
experiment. So that the theory and the experiment comparison is one of the most important and burning questions. So some of our work that I did with my collaborators over the years is of significance to that particular experiment.
Wonderful, wonderful. If I'm correct, the fine GKZ, that is the the Mathematica package, right?
Yes, yes, yes,
That is the one. So I'll be anyway linking it in the show note references. So
yes.
interested listeners can please look up. It's a very fascinating thing. So one should not get the perception that uh, is high energy physics is only about analytical theory. There is some very beautiful computation also which is emerging. I also know some of my colleagues within my own department who also are now trying to utilize machine learning tools to also interface experimental data and then
Oh, yes,
extract some meaningful patterns and other things.
yes,
And
yes.
yeah, it's quite beautiful in that way. So one of the other elements, Ananta, which I wanted to discuss a little bit more, and this is a kind of going slightly more away from the conventional research, is your engagement with the world. In fact, I'll come to that in 2 to 3 different parts. First and the foremost is, of course, you also write blogs, which I am linking the reference in the show notes. So please have a look. The listeners can have a look at it. And the other part is your fantastic engagement on Facebook, which brings in the element of humor. In fact, that is something which I haven't discussed more at the beginning. But if anybody who knows Anant, even peripherally, knows about his humor, and it's witty humor. It's actually really, really, intense in terms of intellectual quality, but yet makes people chuckle and then think about it. And I would strongly suggest people follow Anant on Facebook. It is a delight. It is one of the best things happening on online. If you have not already been under the umbrella of his witty magic of humor. So Anand, how did you develop these qualities? I know this is inherent, and this is something which is not easy for somebody to learn. But first and the foremost, first is a blog, and then your thought process, your thinking, and it's not like it is detached from your living. It is very much part of your living. I would be very fascinated to learn about it. If you can just tell us a little bit about that.
You have embarrassed me so much that I think I'm going to run away or hide under the table.
Yeah. No, not at all, not at all.
You see, this whole enterprise of research and all actually is a very lonely profession.
Yeah.
If you're in this profession, most of the time you're working in some small problem, and probably three other people in the world are going to be interested in what you're doing. And as you know, if you're in a research institute like IISc, which did not even have an undergraduate population, you
Hmm.
hardly know anybody. And I was in a department which had hardly any members, so it was like fairly lonely. So, and I was always a more extroverted social person. And today, most of us live in very small family units also. My mother, for instance, had 27 first cousins. I have about six, of who four live in the US. So we don't really have many relatives, not that one can bank on relatives, but even things like friendships over the years. I think the difficulty of living in India, of living, in our cities with all the inherent difficulties and choke traffic, you don't really go anywhere. You are either in the office or you go home. Who goes to a music concert? I don't know what's the last time I've been in a music hall. So it's like some people are very happy without meeting anybody. There are others who need a lot of company. If you don't have company, maybe you look for other avenues to connect with people. And it's exactly this that has made something like Facebook so popular. It's not just me. In fact, a good fraction of my friends are people who are significantly older than myself,
Yeah.
people who are not able to go out very much, or they're living by themselves, and this and that, and who needs somebody to talk to. There's one gentleman, he lives in Boston, and he has no social life
mm,
by his own admission, and
mm,
he looks to Facebook for friendships, and does not feel alone when he is talking. Maybe this was the origin of.
mm,
My father used to have a very wonderful sense of humor, and he could
mm,
joke both in Tamil and in English
mm,
equally easily. So probably I picked up part of that from there. But as you know, many of the topics that I engage with, the topics are very serious. It could
yeah,
be world
yeah.
politics, it could be Palestine, it could be, the condition of our poor people, uh, about inflation, about the general suffering of our people. But I don't think on Facebook anybody wants to read, a brutal description of what is going on. It's not a referee journal where you have to give references, or you don't have to. So even though the themes are serious, I find that the best way of communicating what I have to say is by using satire and irony. And it's just a way of telling a tale. So, of course, once I had to win my capacity as chairman of CHEP, I would often have to give a presentation here or a talk there, uh, essentially because I was holding the chair. So it was a retirement party for two of my physics department colleagues that I'd made. I had worked very hard on what I must say. It had a written transcript. I was only one with a written transcript. And then it amused a lot of people. And a friend, Shrikant Shastri, came up and said, "Oh, that was very humorous. It seems that you take after your great uncle T.P. Kailasam." So, what can I
Mm.
say? Kailasam was known to be a very famous humorist because he
Of
also,
course. Yes,
probably the
yes.
only way he could criticize the society around him was to employ humor rather than, giving some very heavy sociological thesis that nobody would study. So I do Facebook partly to unburden myself about some of the issues that we face as human beings every day. Whether it is a response to, some deadly thing that has happened, or to communicate, or it's something that's irritating you on a daily basis. You want to talk about it, or to share some good news, or to win some friends, or to win some enemies. There's so many things in life. So that's roughly what I had to say on this topic.
Yeah, in fact, what about blogging, Anant? You also do blogging, I know.
I
How
was
did you?
I
Oh, yeah.
was blogging because I wanted again the same set uh, of of concerns that I had, which is to
Mm,
write about the
mm,
subject, write about physics, write about society, things of the sort. Then I found that now nobody reads blogs anymore. So then I moved almost completely to Facebook. Sometimes I write a post on a blog because I want a more permanent imprint on something that I
yeah,
have done or I wanted. Yeah, wanted it's so that I can go back to it. Supposing 2 years from now, I want to go back to an article that I wrote, let us say, on
mm,
communication.
mm.
I can find it there. It's very hard to trace things on Facebook and so.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. That's partly one of the reasons why I also write. I have a kind of dedicated blog, but of course, we also post everything what we have in as part of the podcast on the blogs too. But the general aspect of uh, expressing your thoughts, it need not be only science. It can be anything, even related to politics. It can be related to, let's say, something which you deeply feel about. For example, the war. In fact, some of the things what you have written is very pertinent. For example, the war between Israel and Palestine is kind of, it's heart wrenching because at the end of the day, it's the humanity which is really, really getting affected. And the process of also expressing your thoughts gives you some kind of a platform for you to understand your own thoughts, right? Because
Oh
these
yes,
platforms are not merely for just expressing. In the process of the expression, probably you will also construct the thought.
yes, and also learning. Yeah, so to sort yourself out and to be able to say what is what and what is important and what is not. You know, for instance, in this particular instance that you have mentioned, it really is about the very powerful versus the totally powerless. And that
Mm.
is what is so sharp about the whole thing. And it is so sad that none of us is able to do anything about this.
Anything about it?
And I don't know when it
Absolutely.
will end. And we can't say that it doesn't affect us. It will affect every one of us. For instance, I saw with great sadness a couple of very young students in the US of Indian origin, uh,
Mm.
kind of, uh, you know, they passed away because at their
Mm.
own hands.
Mm. Mm.
Now, it cannot be that the world is not affecting them.
Mm.
Things like depression, things like inability to cope and come to terms with the real world are related to the atmosphere and the climate in which you live. Many will say that the physical climate affects you in terms of if it's snowing, raining, so on. It's
Mm.
also
Mm.
true about the cultural climate. If you live in a very foul cultural climate, which is very racist and oppressive, it's going to affect you. If you think that the economic climate doesn't affect you, it's ridiculous because if you can't go out and buy a loaf of bread, to fill your tummy, it's going to affect you. So, cultural uh, factors, all these things are part of the climate in which a human being exists. And every one of them will have an impact on the way you live and deal with it. You know. So I'm afraid that all these events that are going on in the world are going to affect an entire generation, not
Mm.
just the ones
Mm.
who are like immediate victims of this, but those who live in a foul environment of hatred and viciousness going to affect them also. So luckily, it has not come home. The chickens haven't come
Mm.
to roost yet. But in India also, we have a lot of problems, and nobody knows how to deal with any of these. So, but I don't want to get into that discussion here as far as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in fact, going back to slightly on a lighter aspect of your world, what you actually have also created for a lot of us to enjoy is your love for literature and poetry. In fact, I would, of course, link some of the things what is put on Anand's webpage. But I would want to actually pick on some of the very interesting poems which are there on his webpage, and of them, which is directly related to his own name. And this is a beautiful poem by John Updike on Anand's name. Of course, it is written in the name of M. Ananthanarayan. I'll read only the first four lines, but it is really worth reading the whole one. But I would urge listeners to go and read it. I'll read the first four lines and also ask more about this from Anant himself. So here is the first four lines. Start quote. Though authors are a dreadful clan to be avoided if you can, I would like to meet the Indian M. Ananthanarayanan. Stop quote. Anant, tell us a little bit more about your love for these kind of very interesting poems and also some very, very fascinating poems. For example, The Wombat by Abdul Nash, and also something related to Hamlet, which is part of the webpage yeah, which you have put online. And of course, there might be many, many other snippets and parts of the literature which you might have been reading. Tell us a little bit about this so that we learn more
So
about
there,
the.
Updike also calls it the sumptuous span of A's and N's. Now, now this person, whoever wrote this book called The Silver Pilgrimage. So I had found this poem, and in those days, when I didn't have many students and all, I just added this to my web page. And a few years later, a gentleman wrote to me, identifying himself as the son of Mr. M. Ananthanarayanan. He was a retired person living in Mysore. So I am, of course,
Yes.
like many Tamilians, named after my grandfather. So my B stands for Balasubramanian Ananthanarayan. My father was Ananthanarayan Balasubramanian. So there's not much
Okay.
suspense as to how I got this particular name. This wombat also I like very much.
Yes.
So it's just a corny poem. But the other one, the Hamlet lines that you mentioned, there is an effect called the anomaly in quantum physics, where
Mm.
if a classical symmetry law that you expect can be broken in terms of by this object known as the anomaly. It exists in nature sometimes, and it again has to do with the process of renormalization, regularization that I mentioned. But it's actually it's an amazing coincidence because when you write down a conservation law for a charge, you write down a current equation for the
Mm.
currents. So here Shakespeare uses the expression, the currents turn awry, the
Yeah.
currents turn awry and lose the name of action, which is also very interesting because when you integrate the Lagrangian, you have the action. And it's the action functional of a field theory that actually is no longer sacred in the presence of anomalies. Of course, Shakespeare didn't have any idea about all these things, but it's just a beautiful thing. And I just
Beautiful,
kept it
beautiful.
there. Yeah. As for
Yeah,
literature and
it's
all, I must
yeah.
say I'm very sad that now I don't have much time to read anything very serious. Probably all the weight of life and experiences and responsibilities. I no longer read as much as I would like to. And also all this Facebook and media and smartphones, they have really shredded our attention span. So as I turn into a senior citizen later this year and
Mm.
start to prepare for the next phase of my life, retirement in a few years, perhaps I'll get back the reading habit. I hope I do. But it's still one of the great joys of life. There's a Sanskrit shloka, which I don't remember anymore, which I used to know, which roughly says that in the poison tree of life, it's only the joy of books and the company of friends that is worth
Mm.
looking for. Something like this. There's a famous Sanskrit shloka which I don't remember. Yeah, yeah. So that is what.
Beautiful, beautiful. So it's delightful that it also kind of gives you a kind of an escape from the real world, and this has been also discussed in various different books, especially in fiction, where what we think as an escape turns out to be actually the real world. In
Yes.
fact, the world we live in happens to be a kind of an escape. So literature tries to give you that kind of an escape, where you will also see that what you felt as a fiction turns out to be more realistic sometimes than the world you live in. And yeah, in that sense, it's a fascinating thing what you also mentioned, and and literature gives you that beautiful platform to explore the world in a new dimension altogether. That's,
Indeed. I mean, that's the whole point of why people write. They write
yeah. Mm.
because there's an imagined audience to which they are writing. It's also a way in which you probably seek to escape the real world. It's not just the reader who's trying to escape, the writer is also trying to escape. And when you're reading, if you're reading Kalidasa, you're reading somebody from 2000 years ago. Or if you're reading, let us say, Virgil or someone like this from that era. So you are also spanning the entire range of modern human experience. I'm not talking about pre-civilization. Civilization itself, is, of course, is a difficult word, but let's say we all agree on a definition of civilization. So it's like you are communicating and you're in communion with all our those who came before us and what the world was that they are describing. It's also interesting the universality of experience that what you might read in a play from 2000 years ago, the motivations, the compulsions, the jealousies, the hatreds, the
Mm.
loves, the affections are all the same a few thousand years ago. Maybe that's what should give us hope and confidence that at every stage in history, probably there were ups and downs, and at every stage there were obstructions that people encountered, whoever they were, and so the show goes on.
Wonderful, wonderful. So one of the aspects which I also do as part of the podcast is to ask my guests to just say a few words in their mother tongue, because we also started this whole conversation with some deliberation on languages, and I know that you also have a very deep connection to your parents, uh, and unfortunately they are no more, but you also developed a deep sense of connection to them, not only through what they did but also what you learned and how you interacted. And I assume you would have also done that through some beautiful words, especially in your mother tongue. So, Anant, could you please tell us a little bit about why you do what you do, and what motivates you to do that
See,
in your mother tongue.
I have a little issue with the mother tongue, and which I describe as follows. For
Hmm.
me, Tamil is like my like Devaki, and Telugu is like Yashoda for me. You know, because of this kind of amorphous and ambiguous mother tongue that I have. Because my father's didn't know much Telugu when I was a kid, he learned much more later, and my mother, it was the other way. Her Telugu was very strong and Tamil wasn't. So,
Hmm.
as such, I am equally comfortable in conversing in these languages, but I don't know much about them again, partly because of this All India experience. And Hindi was my first language in school, as difficult as it was. So I don't know what I talked to some of my cousins in Tamil. I talked to my friends in Telugu, and so. But I have rarely talked about my profession or my work in either of these languages. But let me tell you one of my favorite couplets in Telugu, which I've learnt.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yeah, please do
So
please
this
do
is
that.
my
Yeah.
advice to young people. ఎప్పటిక ఏది ప్రస్తుతం అప్పటిక మాటలాడి అన్యుల మనమున్ నొప్పించక తప్పించుకుని తిరుగువాడు ధన్యుడు సుమతి, which translates to uh, do not use any harsh words, and do not get into trouble unnecessarily. And a person who can kind of escape these difficulties and lead a happy life is truly blessed. So that is an advice that I always give young people. Don't use harsh words. Don't get into unnecessary arguments. Life is short. Just have a good time. You may have observed that even on Facebook, one of the reasons why I have many friends like you is I rarely get into fights. I have a
Hmm.
point of view. You say a point of view, fine. I'm not going to try to convert you or to make you change your mind or convince you. Hey, you have all the arguments in front of you. You want to persuade it, fine. Still want to stick to your guns? Be my guest. So that is my approach
Yeah.
generally with even very difficult people. So
Beautiful, beautiful, very, very nicely put. Is something which is need of the hour in the age and times where people are getting farther away from each other. These are the kind of messages which are very important for us to always remember. So finally, before we conclude, Anant, your recommendations on some inspiring stuff from books, from arts, from music, from anything which really motivates you and keeps you going, which our listeners can also benefit. In fact, that's the reason why I ask it as a recommendation,
the first thing I
not
want
as
to
a
say, the first
yeah,
thing I want
yeah.
to say, I really want to commend you on this effort. I kind
Thank
of
you.
started noticing you more on Twitter, and then I saw that you were doing this podcast, and I said, "Wow, this guy really has a lot of patience." And I really appreciate this effort because it's an entirely individual effort of yours. And this is there, it's going to be a really durable contribution. And it is also
Yeah.
very good that you're not looking for celebrities on the show, that you're looking
Hmm.
for normal people who are engaged, and that we also have a story to tell is something very nice. And the way in which you are creating a resource, not just for the present, but for the future is really commendable. And the interest that you have taken in me today, and I'm sure you take the same interest in each one of your guests, is truly commendable. You have actually sat and devoted time to find out something about each of those. It's not easy. So I really and truly appreciate your commitment to what you have done. um, the
My
only thing.
honor. I should respond to this. First and the foremost thing, thank you very much. I really thank all people like you who are very generous, who to share their knowledge. That is something I'm very, very thankful to everybody. The second point is also I'm deeply interested in biographical aspect of people. In fact, that's one of the motivations behind all these things. As you clearly mentioned, hopefully this can actually become some kind of a small part of the oral history archives, which other people can also use and study people, especially people who are interesting and who are also involved in scientific research. So yeah, I'm very thankful to people like you, Anand, for spending time and, and
There's one more thing I want to
sharing thoughts.
say. which is
Okay.
my accidental connection with Springer. I
Yeah.
was on their board of editors for a long time, European Physical Journal A, Hadrons and Nuclei. But
Yeah.
this was from 2008. And after that, I've been with European Physical Journal special
Mm,
topics and also on the Springer briefs. One of my missions has been, to bring as many good writers as possible,
mm,
writing actual scientific books, articles, and so on. And I think even if I'm never remembered for my research or my teaching, definitely the mark that we have made with Indian authors in these series, some are
mm,
also from other countries, I think is very good, because I have had very senior people writing to me saying, this was really a good contribution, because there's no way I could have got my book published by Springer but for the effort that you have taken. I think
wonderful.
that every one of us can contribute to Indian science in some way or the other. There is no playbook by which you are going to contribute. It's up to you to find and use whatever resource you find at any given time. And if you do any work selflessly and altruistically, that is going to be the most durable contribution that you're going to make. And one of the things that I want to say to people, to younger people, is you
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to try to solve research problems, even if they are very small. Try to do something new every day. Don't think that some problem is beneath your dignity. Even at this age, I sit down and write small programs to test something, to see, is this function doing this right? Is that number coming out close to what it should be? Things of this sort. Get engaged. Don't wait for some very big problem that is going to loom on the horizon, and you're going to solve that extraordinarily important problem. That's not going to happen. You have to keep working on many small problems, and that will give you joy. Someday you may solve a very important problem, you may not, it doesn't matter. And don't
Absolutely.
ever put yourself down unnecessarily. Every one of us has some role in the scheme of things, and be happy with what.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your advice to students and anybody who is interested in research. Yeah.
um, I have myself given many talks. It goes under the rubric of joy of discovery, and the scientific project, and what is the nature of this. These are all my own points of view and my own spin. It is very hard to say that this is really advice for anybody. Actually, each one of us, whether it is Pavan or myself, we are the message. You can look at us and see, do I really want to be like this guy or not? Not saying either it is good or bad, whether he or she went through life and do they call themselves a reasonable success or not. What is the metric for success? Is it vast riches? Is it happiness? It's all for an individual to decide. But what I must say is that many of my students are quite keen, my PhD students, quite keen to continue in research. Almost every one of them has gone for at least one postdoc. So I feel that they think that this is a good thing to do. Many of them have been very good students, and they have come here because they love research and they want to do these things. And I think many of our students in India, especially in the theoretical sector, are those who are mathematically inclined. Again, for the same reasons that I came here, is the reasons why they have also come here. They like problem solving. This is probably subjects that they were best at in school. They may have had a couple of inspiring teachers, things of the sort. Ultimately, you have to enjoy what you're doing on the one hand. On the other hand, we all live in the real world. We have to make our compromises, we have to make our adjustments and survive, because human survival is no longer assured, as you know. So you have to earn a living, you have to support your family members, you have to support yourself. There are all these decisions that you have to take. There are some, of course, who are exceptionally gifted, so they don't need any advice anyway. And for others, it's all part of the game. Have fun, try to do your best, try to learn, be honest, and have as much integrity as possible. Try to help others, because the more selfless and more altruistic you are, the less complicated your life will be in all your relationships, whether it's personal or professional. And so I'm very glad that I have this opportunity to say these words to you all, and I hope it is of some value.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anant, for spending such a long time uh, not only in spending time, but also sharing your knowledge. In fact, that would hopefully motivate a lot of us to reflect on this world, and also reflect on ourselves. And I'm thankful to you for this whole thing. Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you so much. And I kind of invited myself to be on your show. So I'm sure that I'm not going to regret it. That is for sure. So,
No, no, no.
yeah,
In fact,
so
the invitation was about to come. In fact,
yes,
it's only a happenstance that we
yes.
communicated slightly out of sync. But of course, it is my privilege and honor to have
Well, I
this
had no
conversation
inhibition
with
in inviting myself to your show.
you.
Let me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I felt no
So,
embarrassment and no barrier at all. So,
absolutely, my pleasure, my pleasure.
thank you so
So
much.
this is Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science, and this
Yes.
time with the one and the only Ananthanarayan, and who also humanizes the science.
And we
Thank
are on
you
the
very much.
brink of Valentine's Day. So let's hope that the entire world is our Valentine. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you,
Bye.
thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.